Chapter 1. The rejection letter hit Scarlett Hayes' inbox at 11:47 p.m., the same moment her grandmother's heart monitor flatlined in the ICU 3 floors below. She stared at her laptop screen in the hospital waiting room, the words blurring through exhausted tears. "We regret to inform you that your loan application has been denied. The experimental treatment that might save Graham's life would cost another $200,000. Money she didn't have. Money no bank would lend her." The silence stretched until her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, exclusive opportunity. $500K annually. Discretion required. Steele Industries. Scarlett's fingers trembled as she clicked the attached link. The job posting was sparse: personal assistant to CEO, live-in position, immediate start. No experience required, but the contract terms made her stomach clench. Absolute confidentiality. No questions about employer's private affairs. Violation of terms results in $50 million penalty. $50 million. More money than she'd see in 10 lifetimes. But $500,000 would save Graham. 3 days later, Scarlett stood before the steel and glass tower that housed Steele Industries, her best interview suit pressed and her last $20 spent on cab fare. The elevator seemed to climb forever before opening onto the 62nd floor. The receptionist, an ice-blonde woman who looked like she'd stepped from a magazine, barely glanced up. "Miss Hayes? Mr. Steele will see you now." Scarlett's heels clicked across marble floors toward double doors that opened as she approached. The office beyond stole her breath, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a god's-eye view of the city, furniture that probably cost more than her yearly salary, and behind an imposing desk, the man who would either save her life or destroy it. Blake Steele. She'd researched him, of course. 29 years old, inherited his father's company at 25 and tripled its value. Hotels, security, consulting, his empire touched everything. But the photos hadn't captured the sheer presence of him. 6'3" of perfect proportions wrapped in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her car. Dark hair swept back from a face that belonged on magazine covers, and eyes the color of storm clouds that seemed to see straight through her. When he stood, every instinct Scarlett possessed screamed danger. "Miss Hayes." His voice was whiskey and smoke, the kind that made women do stupid things. He didn't offer to shake hands, just studied her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Sit." Not a request. A command. Scarlett sat in the leather chair across from his desk, hyper-aware of how his gaze traveled over her, clinical, appraising, like she was livestock he was considering purchasing. "Tell me why you need this job." He settled back in his chair, fingers steepled, gray eyes never leaving her face. The truth spilled out before she could stop it. Graham's cancer, the failed treatments, the experimental therapy that was her last hope. The crushing debt that made her desperate enough to answer a mysterious job posting. She laid her desperation bare because something in those cold eyes demanded nothing less than honesty. When she finished, silence stretched between them. Blake's nostrils flared slightly, his pupils dilating as he breathed deep. "You're perfect," he said finally, the words carrying strange weight. "I haven't even seen the job description. The job is simple. You live here, in the penthouse guest quarters. You handle my personal schedule, manage my private correspondence, ensure my needs are met." His lips curved in what might have been a smile if it had held any warmth. "In return, you receive $500,000 annually, full benefits, and enough signing bonus to handle your grandmother's medical bills immediately." Scarlett's heart hammered against her ribs. It was too good to be true, which meant there was a catch. There was always a catch. "What aren't you telling me?" Those storm gray eyes glittered with approval. "Intelligent. Good. You'll need that." He slid a thick contract across the desk. "Read it carefully. Every word matters." Scarlett scanned the document, her lawyer uncle's training echoing in her head. Standard employment language, generous compensation, and then, "I can never access your private floor during moon phases?" She looked up sharply. security concerns. You'll learn to respect them." His voice held warning wrapped in silk. "And this confidentiality clause, a $50 million penalty, seems excessive for a personal assistant position. My business requires absolute discretion. I deal with sensitive matters. Powerful people who value their privacy above all else." He leaned forward, and Scarlett caught his scent, something wild and woodsy that made her mouth go dry. "Let me be clear, Miss Hayes. Once you sign that contract, you belong to me. Every hour of every day. Your old life ends, and your new one begins. I will own you in every way that matters." The words should have sent her running. Should have triggered every self-preservation instinct she possessed. Instead, they sent heat spiraling through her body in ways that made her question her sanity. "And if I refuse?" His smile was all teeth. "Then you leave, and your grandmother dies. Your choice." Not really a choice at all. Scarlett picked up the fountain pen, real gold, naturally, and signed her name with hands that only trembled slightly. Blake's eyes flashed with something that looked almost like hunger as he watched the ink flow across the paper. When she finished, he reached across the desk and clasped her wrist, his thumb finding her pulse point. "Welcome to your new life, Scarlett." Her name on his lips sounded like a caress and a threat. "Don't make me regret buying you." His skin was fever-hot against hers, his grip gentle but unbreakable. And for just a moment, Scarlett could have sworn she saw something inhuman flicker behind those cold gray eyes. Something that belonged in the deep woods under a full moon. Something that now owned her completely. The contract terms suddenly made terrifying sense, and Scarlett realized she hadn't just signed up for a job. She'd signed her life away to a predator. Chapter 2. Scarlett discovered the true meaning of ownership within 24 hours. She woke in the penthouse guest quarters, a space larger than her entire apartment, to find a complete wardrobe hanging in the walk-in closet. Designer pieces in her exact size, from casual wear to evening gowns, all in colors that complemented her dark hair and pale skin. A note on Steele Industries letterhead lay on the dresser: "Your previous wardrobe has been donated. These selections are more appropriate for your position. K." Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Calendar app installed. "All appointments require pre-approval. Security detail will escort you for any outside activities." She hadn't agreed to a security detail. When Scarlett emerged from her room, she found a tall woman waiting in the hallway. Early 30s, with sleek blonde hair and eyes like golden amber, dressed in an impeccably tailored pantsuit that screamed money and danger in equal measure. "Ms. Hayes. I'm Vera, Mr. Steele's head of security." Her voice was cultured, but something about her smile seemed too sharp. "I'll be briefing you on protocol." Protocol, it turned out, meant every moment of Scarlett's life was now subject to Blake's approval. Where she went, what she ate, who she spoke to, all filtered through a system designed to monitor and control. "Mr. Steele takes the safety of his assets very seriously," Vera explained as they toured the penthouse. "You'll find the staff here are all highly trained professionals." Scarlett met them one by one. Vincent, the head of household, a silver-haired man who moved with the fluid grace of a dancer and watched her with predatory interest. Rebecca, the chef, stunning, dark-skinned, with an unsettling habit of scenting the air when Scarlett passed. James, the driver, built like a linebacker but silent as a ghost. They were all beautiful. All deadly. And all treated Scarlett like she was something precious and dangerous that belonged to their alpha. Because that's what Blake was, she realized with growing unease. An alpha. And somehow, she'd become part of his pack. By the third day, Scarlett felt like a bird in a golden cage. When she announced her intention to visit her grandmother at the hospital, Vera's amber eyes flashed with something that looked like panic. "I'll need to clear that with Mr. Steele. I don't need his permission to see my dying grandmother," Scarlett snapped, heading for the elevator. She made it exactly 3 steps before Blake appeared. He materialized from seemingly nowhere, blocking her path with 6 feet of controlled fury. Today's suit was navy, perfectly tailored to show off his broad shoulders and lean frame, but it was his face that stopped her cold. Jaw clenched, storm gray eyes blazing with possessive rage. "You don't leave without my permission," he growled, the words vibrating with barely leashed power. "She's my grandmother. And you're mine." The declaration hit her like a physical blow. "Everything you do reflects on me. Everyone you interact with becomes a potential threat or weakness. You agreed to this when you signed that contract." Scarlett lifted her chin, meeting his glare with her own fury. "I agreed to be your assistant, not your prisoner." Something flickered in his eyes, approval mixed with exasperation. Then his expression shifted, becoming calculating rather than angry. "Fine. But we do this my way." 3 hours later, Scarlett watched in stunned silence as her grandmother was transferred to Mount Sinai's private wing via medical helicopter. The best oncology team money could buy, a private suite with a view of Central Park, round-the-clock nursing care, all arranged with a single phone call from Blake Steele. "The experimental treatment starts tomorrow," Blake informed her as they stood in the state-of-the-art hospital room. "Dr. Chen is the leading researcher in this field. If anyone can save her, it's him." Scarlett's throat tightened with emotion she couldn't voice. "Why?" His gray eyes softened for just a moment. "Because you need her alive. And what you need, I provide." The storm hit that evening with unusual violence for the season. Lightning split the sky as rain lashed against the penthouse windows, and Scarlett found herself pacing her quarters like a caged animal. The electricity in the air seemed to call to something deep inside her, making her skin prickle and her nerves sing. When the lights flickered and died, leaving only the emergency lighting, Scarlett felt drawn upward. The private elevator that led to Blake's floor stood open. The electronic locks must have disengaged when the power cut out. She should have stayed in her room. Should have called security. Should have done anything except step into that elevator and press the button for the floor she was forbidden to access. The doors opened onto a space that took her breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows on every side offered a 360-degree view of the storm-lashed city. Lightning illuminated the room in strobing flashes, revealing furniture that was all clean lines and natural materials, nothing like the cold modern aesthetic of the rest of the building. And covering one entire wall were photographs. Scarlett approached slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. Dozens of images in ornate frames, spanning what looked like centuries. A woman in Victorian dress standing beside a lighthouse. Another in 1920s flapper attire outside a speakeasy. A third in 1940s military uniform. All different women. All with Scarlett's face. Her exact face. Same dark hair, same pale skin, same green eyes that seemed to glow in the camera's flash. The resemblance wasn't just uncanny, it was impossible. "You shouldn't be here." Scarlett spun around to find Blake standing in the elevator doorway. Still in his suit but disheveled now, his usually perfect hair mussed, his tie loosened. Lightning flashed behind him, and for a moment he looked like some dark angel of vengeance. "These women," she whispered, gesturing at the photographs. "They look exactly like you." He stepped into the room, and Scarlett realized with growing alarm that the predatory grace she'd noticed before was more pronounced now. His movements were too fluid, too controlled. Not quite human. "Every face you wear, I've seen before. Every lifetime, I've been waiting." "That's impossible." "Is it?" He began walking toward her with deliberate slowness, like a hunter stalking prey. "Tell me, Scarlett. Have you ever felt like you don't quite belong? Like there's something wild inside you that you can't name?" She had. God help her, she had. The restlessness, the dreams of running through forests on 4 legs, the way her senses seemed sharper than everyone else's. "You have no idea what you are, do you?" Blake was close enough now that she could see gold flecks in his gray eyes. Close enough to catch that wild, woodsy scent that made her want to lean closer even as every instinct screamed at her to run. "What are you talking about?" But her voice came out breathless, and she found herself backing toward the storm-lashed windows. "What I've spent billions preparing for. What I've waited decades to find. He followed her step for step until she was pressed against the smart glass, the city lights blurring through the rain-streaked surface behind her. My mate. The word hit her like lightning. Mate. Not girlfriend, not lover, mate. Something primitive and permanent and absolutely terrifying. You're insane, she breathed. Am I? He placed his hands on either side of her head, caging her against the window. His pupils were dilated, his breathing rough, and when he smiled, Scarlett saw something that made her blood freeze. His canines had elongated into points. The penalty for breaking our contract isn't money, little wolf, he whispered, his voice dropping to a growl that seemed to vibrate through her bones. It's your life. Little wolf. The endearment, if it could be called that, sent ice through her veins. Because once you're awakened, Blake continued, his lips brushing against her throat as he spoke, once you become what you were born to be, you'll be mine completely. And wolves who betray their pack don't live to regret it. Thunder crashed overhead, and Scarlett realized that the storm outside was nothing compared to the one she'd just walked into. She wasn't just employed by a monster. She was mated to one. And apparently, she was one too. Chapter 3. The full moon hung like a silver coin in the obsidian sky, and Scarlett felt its pull in her bones. She'd been restless all day, pacing the penthouse like a caged animal while Blake's staff watched her with knowing eyes. When evening fell, he appeared at her door dressed in a midnight black suit that made his gray eyes look like winter storms. Tonight you stay in the safe room, he informed her, his voice brooking no argument. Why? Because I have business to conduct, and you're not ready for what that entails. His gaze raked over her, and she caught that familiar flare of his nostrils, like he was scenting her. The moon affects us all differently, little wolf. Some of us have learned control. Others. He stepped closer, and Scarlett's pulse spiked at the predatory grace in his movements. Others are still discovering what they're capable of. The safe room turned out to be a marvel of technology hidden behind what looked like a bookshelf in the penthouse library. Steel-reinforced walls, independent air system, enough supplies to last weeks, and most importantly, a bank of monitors showing every security feed in the building. The doors lock automatically, Blake explained as he showed her the controls. Nothing gets in or out without the proper codes. You'll be perfectly safe. Safe from what? Scarlett wanted to ask, but the predatory tension radiating from him made her swallow the question. Whatever was happening tonight, it was big enough to make a billionaire werewolf nervous. The heavy doors sealed with a soft hiss, leaving Scarlett alone with the hum of electronics and the silver light filtering through the reinforced windows. She settled in front of the monitors, telling herself she was just curious about the building's security system. She wasn't prepared for what she saw. The 61st floor, Blake's executive conference room, was filled with men and women in expensive suits. A board meeting, ostensibly, but Scarlett's enhanced hearing picked up fragments of conversation that made her blood run cold. The Hayes assets must be secured before the others realize what she is. How long since the last sighting? 73 years. London. The hunters found her before we could intervene. Scarlett's hands trembled as she adjusted the audio feed. They were talking about her. About her family name. About hunters. And then the moon reached its zenith. The change began with Blake. His perfectly controlled exterior cracked like a mask, revealing something wild and primal underneath. His spine lengthened, his hands shifted into claws, his face elongated into something between man and wolf. But he retained enough humanity to stand upright, to speak, to command the room with an authority that made Scarlett's soul recognize him as alpha. One by one, the other board members followed suit. Partial transformations that left them balanced between human and beast, creatures of legend hiding behind corporate facades. They spoke of territories and bloodlines, of ancient contracts and modern warfare. The lost heir has awakened, Blake's voice rumbled through the speakers, distorted by his transformed vocal cords but unmistakably his. After 2 centuries of searching, she's finally within our protection. The hunters will come, warned a woman Scarlett recognized as Vera, her security chief. In her hybrid form, she was even more terrifying, all teeth and claws and golden eyes. They always do. Let them come, Blake snarled. This time, we're ready. Scarlett's heart hammered against her ribs as the implications crashed over her. The photographs in his private room. The uncanny resemblances. The way everyone treated her like she was precious and dangerous. She was the lost heir they'd been hunting. Reincarnated. Hunted. Killed. The alarm started screaming at 11:47 p.m. Red lights bathed the safe room as emergency protocols activated. Through the monitors, Scarlett watched as black-clad figures rappelled down the building's exterior, smashing through windows with military precision. Not ordinary corporate espionage, these moved like soldiers, like hunters. The panic room's defenses engaged automatically. Steel shutters slammed over the windows, additional locks engaged, and a computerized voice announced, "Safe room secured. All inhabitants remain calm. Security forces have been notified." But Scarlett felt anything but calm. Power coursed through her veins like molten silver, making her skin burn and her vision sharpen to supernatural clarity. Through the building's walls, she could sense the attackers moving with deadly purpose toward the penthouse. Toward her. When the first explosion rocked the building, something inside Scarlett snapped. The safe room's door, 6 inches of reinforced steel, buckled under her bare hands. The electronic lock sparked and died as energy poured from her fingertips. The monitors shattered in sequence, their screens going white-hot before going dark. Scarlett didn't remember leaving the safe room. Didn't remember moving through the penthouse or confronting the black-clad figures who'd breached the upper floors. She came back to herself standing in the ruined remains of her quarters, 7 unconscious attackers scattered around her like broken dolls. Her eyes reflected silver in the emergency lighting. Her hands glowed with residual power that made the air itself shimmer. And standing in the doorway, still partially transformed, Blake watched her with dark satisfaction. "There she is," he murmured, stepping over the unconscious bodies with predatory grace. His claws had retracted, but his eyes still held flecks of gold that marked him as other. As alpha. As hers. He cupped her face in hands that trembled with restrained power, his thumbs brushing over her cheekbones like she was made of precious metal. "My billions invested in the most sophisticated security system on Earth," he said, voice rough with emotion she couldn't name, "and you tore through it like paper. I don't understand what's happening to me." The words came out broken, desperate. "You're remembering," Blake replied, pulling her against his chest where she could feel his heart racing. "What you've always been. What you've always been hunted for." He gestured to the destroyed electronics, the unconscious attackers, the residual power still crackling in the air around them. "You're not just my mate, little wolf. You're the weapon I've been waiting for. The power that corporations and governments would kill to control." His lips brushed her temple, and she felt the sharp edge of his partially extended canines. "Those photographs, they're all you. Different lives, different centuries, but always the same soul. Always hunted. Always dying young before you could reach your full potential." Scarlett's knees nearly buckled as the truth crashed over her. Lifetimes of running, of hiding, of being found and killed before she could understand what she was. The dreams that weren't dreams but memories. The restlessness that was her soul recognizing its true nature. "But not this time," Blake vowed, his arms tightening around her possessively. "This time, you have me. This time, you have a pack willing to die to protect you. This time, when they come hunting, they'll find that the prey has become the predator." Thunder rumbled overhead, but Scarlett barely heard it over the sound of her world reshaping itself around this terrible, wonderful truth. She wasn't just Scarlett Hayes, desperate granddaughter drowning in debt. She was a force of nature. A weapon. A soul that had been fighting the same war for centuries. And this time, she wouldn't face it alone. Chapter 4. The morning after Scarlett's awakening, Blake showed her the true extent of his empire. They stood in his private office as dawn painted the city in shades of gold and amber, spreadsheets and acquisition reports covering every surface of his massive desk. But these weren't ordinary business documents. They were 20 years of methodical planning, each purchase calculated with surgical precision. "The Hayes Trust," he said, sliding a folder toward her. "Your family's original holdings, scattered across 12 states after your grandmother sold them to pay for your mother's medical bills. I bought every property, every business, every scrap of land that bore your name." Scarlett's hands trembled as she flipped through the documents. Hotels, restaurants, a chain of bookstores, even the lighthouse where one of her past lives had been photographed. Millions upon millions of dollars, all to preserve pieces of a heritage she'd never known existed. "The security company that provides protection for half the supernatural community on the East Coast," he continued, producing another stack of papers. "The Medical Research Foundation funding your grandmother's treatment. The private investigation firm that's been tracking reincarnated souls for the past century." His gray eyes never left her face as he spoke. "Every acquisition, every alliance, every billion spent, it was all preparation for your return. You built an empire for me," she whispered, the magnitude of his obsession stealing her breath. "I built a fortress for you," he corrected, moving around the desk with that predatory grace she was beginning to recognize as purely him. "The world is full of those who would use your power for their own ends. I made myself powerful enough to stop them." He was close enough now that she could smell the wild, woodsy scent that seemed to cling to his skin. Close enough to see the gold flecks in his storm gray eyes that marked him as something more than human. "Starting today, you learn to fight back." The private gym occupied an entire floor of steel tower, equipped with everything from traditional weights to combat training areas designed for supernatural beings. Blake had changed into dark athletic wear that showcased the lean muscle beneath his usual business suits, and Scarlett tried not to stare at the way the fabric clung to his broad shoulders. "Your power responds to emotion," he explained, circling her like a predator studying prey. "Fear, anger, desperation, they're all triggers. But control comes from discipline." He demonstrated a basic defensive stance, his movements fluid and precise. When Scarlett tried to mirror him, he moved behind her, his hands settling on her hips to adjust her position. "Lower," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "Feel the connection to the earth beneath your feet." His hands traveled up her sides, ostensibly correcting her posture, but Scarlett felt claimed by every touch. Marked. His fingers skimmed along her spine, positioning her shoulders, and she had to bite back a gasp at the heat that followed in their wake. "Again," he commanded when she fumbled a simple block. This time, when he moved to correct her stance, his body caged her against the mirrored wall. His chest pressed against her back, his arms bracketing her shoulders as he guided her movements. She could feel the controlled power in every line of his frame, the careful restraint that kept him from taking what he clearly wanted. "You're not focusing," he growled, his lips brushing the shell of her ear. "Hard to focus when you're," she broke off, heat flooding her cheeks. "When I'm what?" His voice dropped to that dangerous purr that made her knees weak. "When you're touching me like you own me." "I do own you." The words were matter of fact, spoken with the casual confidence of a man who'd never doubted his right to possess what he desired. "Every breath, every heartbeat, every thought in that beautiful head, mine." He spun her around to face him, and Scarlett found herself trapped between his powerful frame and the unforgiving mirror. His eyes had darkened to the color of storm clouds, and she could see the predator lurking just beneath his civilized surface. "The question is," he continued, his hands settling on either side of her head, "are you going to keep fighting what we both know is inevitable?" Training became a form of elaborate seduction. Every lesson was an excuse for his hands to map her body, every correction an opportunity for him to demonstrate his dominance. He taught her to harness her power through meditation, his voice guiding her into a trance while his fingers traced patterns on her skin that had nothing to do with technique. "Feel the energy flowing through you," he would whisper, his hands covering hers as power crackled between their palms. "Let it fill every part of you until there's no distinction between the magic and the woman." In the strategy sessions that followed, he schooled her in the supernatural world's politics while she tried to ignore the way he watched her mouth when she spoke. He sat too close during their discussions, invaded her personal space with calculated precision, and left her surrounded by his scent until she could barely think straight. The hunters have been tracking your bloodline for 3 centuries, he explained one afternoon, spreading ancient maps across his desk. They believe your power can be harvested, transferred to others through ritual sacrifice. Scarlett shuddered, and immediately his arm came around her shoulders, protective, possessive, warm. They'll never touch you, he promised, his voice carrying the absolute authority of an alpha. I'll burn the world down before I let them take you from me again. The word again hit her like a physical blow. You knew me before. In my other lives. His jaw tightened, and for a moment his carefully controlled mask slipped. Not all of them. But enough. Tell me. Not yet. He turned away from her, but she caught his reflection in the office windows, saw the pain that crossed his features when he thought she wasn't looking. Some truths are earned, little wolf. Others are survived. Their first kiss happened in his private elevator. Scarlett had been challenging his latest edict, a security detail for her weekly hospital visits, when the elevator suddenly stopped between floors. The lights dimmed to emergency lighting, casting Blake's face in harsh shadows that made him look more predator than man. You don't get to make unilateral decisions about my safety, she snapped, poking him in the chest with one finger. I'm not some helpless damsel who needs. He moved faster than human reflexes should allow, pinning her against the elevator wall with his body. His hands framed her face, thumbs brushing over her cheekbones as he stared down at her with eyes that had gone molten gold. You can fight everyone else, he growled, his voice rough with barely leashed control. Challenge every other authority in your life, question every other decision made on your behalf. But you submit to me. Like hell I. He kissed her with the desperate hunger of a man who'd been starving for centuries. His mouth claimed hers with an intensity that stole her breath, his tongue sweeping past her lips to taste and conquer. Scarlett's protests died in her throat as heat exploded through her system, her body responding to his with an inevitability that terrified her. When he finally pulled back, they were both breathing hard. His forehead rested against hers, his eyes still that inhuman gold that marked him as alpha. Mine, he whispered against her lips. Say it. Blake. Say it. The command in his voice bypassed her rational mind and went straight to something primal in her soul. Something that recognized him as mate, as protector, as the other half she'd been searching for across lifetimes. Yours, she breathed, and felt something fundamental shift between them. The elevator resumed its climb, but the world had changed irrevocably. It was 2 days later that Scarlett found the letters. She'd been searching Blake's private study for a file on supernatural law when her fingers found the hidden compartment in his antique desk. Inside lay a stack of letters, yellowed with age, written in Blake's distinctive handwriting. My dearest Rebecca, the first one began, dated 25 years ago. I know you think I'm a monster for what I'm asking, but you have to understand, she's in danger. The hunters are getting closer, and when she manifests, they'll find her. Let me protect her. Let me keep her safe. Scarlett's hands shook as she read letter after letter, each one more desperate than the last. Blake begging her mother to let him into their lives. Promising money, protection, anything Rebecca might need if she'd just allow him to watch over her daughter. The final letter was dated 3 months before her mother's death in a car accident that Scarlett now suspected hadn't been accidental at all. I failed you, it read. I failed to keep you safe, and now she's alone. But I swear on my life, Rebecca, I won't fail her. No matter how long it takes, no matter what I have to sacrifice, I'll find her, and I'll keep her safe. Even if she hates me for it. Finding my correspondence, little wolf? Scarlett spun around to find Blake leaning against the doorframe, still dressed in his perfectly tailored business suit but with his tie loosened and his sleeves rolled up. He looked every inch the billionaire CEO, except for his eyes. Those storm-gray depths held enough pain to drown in. You knew my mother. It wasn't a question. I loved your mother, he said simply, pushing away from the doorframe to stalk toward her with deliberate slowness. She was brilliant, beautiful, and kind enough to see past what I was to what I could become. But Scarlett could hear the unspoken word hanging in the air between them. But she wasn't you. He was close enough now to touch, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his eyes that appeared when his control slipped. Rebecca was sunshine and laughter, everything good in the world made manifest. And I would have cherished her, protected her, given her everything she could ever want. His hands came up to frame her face, thumbs tracing her cheekbones with reverent gentleness. But I was born to possess you, he continued, his voice dropping to that dangerous purr that made her pulse race. To claim you, to mark you, to make you mine in every way that matters. What I felt for your mother was love, pure and selfless and noble. What I feel for you. He trailed off, backing her against his desk until the edge pressed against her thighs. What you feel for me is what? She whispered. Obsession, he admitted, his hands sliding down to grip her waist. Need. A hunger that's consumed me for lifetimes. His eyes had gone that molten gold again, and Scarlett could see the predator lurking just beneath his civilized surface. I've waited 200 years for you to come back to me. Searched every corner of the earth, built an empire, sacrificed everything I was to become worthy of protecting you. He lifted her onto the desk with effortless strength, stepping between her thighs to cage her against his powerful frame. And now that you're here, he continued, his voice rough with barely controlled desire, I'm done waiting. Done being patient. Done pretending I'm civilized enough to court you properly. His mouth found hers again, and this time there was nothing gentle about the kiss. It was claiming, possessive, a promise of dark pleasures and eternal devotion. Scarlett's rational mind screamed at her to push him away, to demand answers, to maintain some semblance of control. Instead, she pulled him closer. When he finally pulled back, his breathing was ragged and his eyes had gone fully wolf. Mine, he growled against her lips, the word a vow and a threat and a promise all wrapped into one. Yours, she whispered back, and felt the last of her resistance crumble into dust. She was claimed. Possessed. Owned by a creature who'd spent lifetimes preparing for this moment. And God help her, she never wanted to be free. Chapter 5. The attack came at dawn, when the city was still sleeping and steel towers stood like a lone sentinel against the pale sky. Scarlett felt the wrongness before the alarm sounded, a crawling sensation between her shoulder blades that made her power spike beneath her skin. She was in Blake's private kitchen, attempting to make coffee like a normal person instead of the supernatural weapon she was apparently destined to become, when the building's defenses engaged with a sound like thunder. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she watched black helicopters circle the tower like mechanical vultures. Not corporate espionage this time, this felt like war. Blake appeared beside her so suddenly she would have jumped if she hadn't grown accustomed to his predatory grace. He was already dressed for battle in tactical gear that made him look more soldier than CEO, his gray eyes scanning the horizon with lethal focus. Hunters, he said, the word falling from his lips like a curse. More than we've seen in decades. How many? Too many. His hand found her cheek, thumb brushing across her skin with desperate tenderness. I need you to get to the safe room. Now. Like hell. Scarlett stepped away from his touch, power crackling around her fingers like silver lightning. I'm not hiding while they attack our home. Our home. The words slipped out before she could stop them, but Blake's eyes flashed with something that looked like triumph. Scarlett. The building shook as something heavy impacted the external wall. Through the windows, Scarlett saw figures rappelling down the sides of the tower, dozens of them, moving with military precision toward the penthouse floors. That's when it happened. The mate bond snapped into place like a physical cord between their souls, so sudden and overwhelming that Scarlett gasped. She could feel Blake's emotions, his desperate protectiveness, his fear for her safety, his love so deep and consuming it threatened to drown her. And underneath it all, the primal satisfaction of a predator who had finally, irrevocably, claimed his mate. Blake staggered, his hand flying to his chest as if he'd been struck. When he looked at her, his eyes had gone completely gold, not the flecks she'd grown used to, but solid, inhuman color that marked him as fully alpha. You're mine now, he breathed, wonder and possession warring in his voice. In every way that matters. Scarlett felt it too, the connection that went deeper than thought, deeper than choice. She could sense his location like a compass point in her mind, feel his heartbeat as if it were her own. The mate bond settled into her bones like it had always belonged there, making her feel complete for the first time in any lifetime she could remember. But there was no time to process the magnitude of what had just happened. The hunters breached the penthouse with explosive charges that blew out 3 windows simultaneously. What followed was a battle that would have looked like something from a nightmare to human eyes. Blake moved like death itself, his partial transformation making him faster and stronger than any mortal man. But it was Scarlett who turned the tide. Power poured from her in waves, silver energy that shattered windows and twisted metal and sent grown men flying like rag dolls. She moved through the penthouse like an avenging angel, her eyes blazing with supernatural light as she protected what was hers. What was hers? The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like coming home. When the smoke cleared and the last hunter lay unconscious on the marble floor, Blake stood watching her with an expression that was pure predatory satisfaction. There was blood on his hands and destruction all around them, but his focus was entirely on her. "There she is," he murmured, stalking toward her with that liquid grace she'd learned to associate with danger. "My magnificent, deadly mate." He caught her face in his hands, and Scarlett could feel his emotions through their new bond: awe, desire, possessive pride that she'd fought beside him like the weapon she was born to be. "Show me," she whispered, though she wasn't entirely sure what she was asking for. Blake's eyes darkened with understanding. He took her hand and pressed it to his throat, just below his jaw, where she could feel his pulse hammering against her palm. The mate mark was small but unmistakable, a stylized wolf's head that seemed to shimmer between silver and black depending on the light. It looked like a tattoo, but Scarlett could feel the power radiating from it, the mystical connection that bound them together across lifetimes. When the bond completed, he explained, his voice rough with emotion, "It marked us both. You'll have one too, though it might not manifest for." Scarlett gasped as heat bloomed across her left shoulder blade. When she twisted to look in the reflective surface of his ruined windows, she saw the twin to his mark appearing on her skin like it was being drawn by an invisible hand. "Now everyone will know," Blake continued, tracing the mark with reverent fingers. "Every supernatural being who sees you will understand that you belong to me. That anyone who threatens you answers to the steel pack." The possessiveness in his voice should have made her angry. Instead, it sent heat spiraling through her body until she could barely think straight. "I can feel you," she whispered, amazed by the emotional connection that hummed between them. "Your thoughts, your feelings. And I can feel you." His hands settled on her waist, pulling her against his powerful frame. "Every emotion, every heartbeat. I'll always know where you are, always know if you're in danger." The implications hit her like a physical blow. "You'll be able to track me anywhere." "Anywhere," he confirmed, not even trying to soften the truth. "You're mine now in every way that matters. Body, soul, heart, all of it belongs to me." The words should have made her feel trapped. Instead, they made her feel cherished in a way she'd never experienced before. "The penthouse is destroyed," she pointed out, trying to regain some equilibrium as she looked around at the wreckage. Blake's smile was pure predator. "Then I'll have to claim you properly somewhere else." His private suite occupied the entire top floor, accessed by a separate elevator that required both biometric scanning and his personal authorization. Scarlett had never been inside before, but as the doors opened, she understood why he'd kept it private. It was a sanctuary designed for a king. Floor-to-ceiling windows on 3 sides offered a panoramic view of the city spread out below like a glittering carpet. The furnishings were luxurious but masculine, dark leather and rich woods, everything chosen to complement rather than compete with the spectacular view. But it was the fourth wall that stole her breath. Covered in monitors showing feeds from around the world, maps tracking supernatural populations, and in the center of it all, a massive screen displaying what looked like a family tree stretching back centuries. Her family tree. "You've been tracking my bloodline for generations," she whispered. "Protecting it," he corrected, coming up behind her to wrap his arms around her waist. "Every reincarnation, every lifetime, I've tried to find you before the hunters did." Scarlett leaned back against his chest, feeling his strength and warmth envelop her like armor. Through their bond, she could sense his emotional state, the relief that she was safe, the satisfaction that she was marked as his, and underneath it all, a love so deep and eternal it took her breath away. "How many times?" she asked. "This makes 7. His arms tightened around her, and she felt his pain like a knife in her chest. "7 times I've watched you die. 7 times I've failed to protect you. But not this time." Scarlett turned in his arms, seeing her own reflection multiplied in the windows that surrounded them, and beyond that, his empire spread out below like a kingdom built for her protection. "This time you were ready." "This time," he agreed, cupping her face with hands that trembled with restrained power, "you're strong enough to fight back." He kissed her then, and through their bonds Scarlett felt the full force of his need for her. It was overwhelming, consuming, the kind of passion that could burn down the world or build empires, and apparently, he'd done both. When they came together on the massive bed that dominated one corner of the suite, it was with the desperate hunger of souls that had been searching for each other across centuries. Blake claimed her with a possessiveness that was both tender and fierce, whispering dark promises against her skin as the city lights twinkled below them. "Mine," he breathed against her throat, his teeth scraping the sensitive skin where her mate mark had appeared. "My mate, my weapon, my salvation." "Yours," Scarlett gasped, her nails digging into his shoulders as power crackled between them, making the lights flicker. "Forever yours." Later, as they lay tangled together with the city sprawling endlessly beyond the windows, Blake traced patterns on her bare skin that made her shiver. "I'd burn it all down," he murmured, gesturing toward the empire visible through the glass. "Every building, every business, every billion I've accumulated. I'd reduce it all to ash before I'd let anyone take you from me again." Scarlett believed him. Through their bond, she could feel the absolute truth of his words, the depths of his devotion that bordered on madness. "You won't have to," she said, pressing a kiss to his chest where she could feel his heart beating in rhythm with hers. "We're stronger together. The hunters, the council, anyone who wants to use my power, they'll have to go through both of us." Blake's arms tightened around her, and she felt his fierce satisfaction through their connection. "My deadly little wolf," he murmured. "They have no idea what they're up against. They should have known their happiness wouldn't last." The call came at midnight, interrupting their planning session for the pack's next move against the hunters. Blake answered his phone with the sharp efficiency of a man who never stopped working, but Scarlett felt his entire emotional state shift through their bond, from contentment to wariness to something that felt like dread. "Victoria," he said, and the name fell from his lips like poison. Scarlett sat up straighter, her power automatically responding to the tension radiating from her mate. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see a helicopter approaching the landing pad on the building's roof, sleek, expensive, and escorted by 2 military-grade aircraft that screamed serious money and serious threat. "She's here," Blake continued into the phone, his voice carefully neutral. "Yes, I understand the council's position. No, I won't be meeting her alone." He ended the call and turned to Scarlett, his gray eyes dark with an emotion she couldn't identify through their bond, something he was actively shielding from her. "Who's Victoria?" she asked, though part of her already knew she wasn't going to like the answer. "Victoria Silverthorne. CEO of Silverthorne Enterprises, and my former..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Former fiancé." Scarlett felt like she'd been punched in the chest. "Former fiancé? An arrangement made by our fathers when we were children. Broken when I realized you existed." His hands came up to frame her face, thumbs brushing across her cheekbones with desperate tenderness. "Scarlett, you have to understand." The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and Scarlett's blood turned to ice. Victoria Silverthorne was everything Scarlett wasn't, tall where Scarlett was average height, platinum blonde where Scarlett was dark, and dressed in a white business suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. She was beautiful in the way that magazine covers demanded, with Arctic blue eyes and the kind of confidence that came from being born to power. But it was her scent that made Scarlett's hackles rise. Wolf, yes, but something else underneath, something that felt ancient and hungry and absolutely ruthless. "Blake," Victoria said, her voice carrying a slight accent that spoke of European finishing schools and old money. Still hiding your pets in the penthouse, I see. Scarlett felt Blake's rage spike through their bond, but his voice remained carefully controlled. Victoria. To what do I owe the pleasure? Business, of course. Victoria's cold blue gaze swept over Scarlett with the kind of assessment usually reserved for livestock. The council has grown tired of your little rebellion. Protecting reincarnated abominations, building unauthorized power bases, refusing to honor contracts made by your bloodline, it ends now. I honor no contract that predates Scarlett's return, Blake said, moving subtly to place himself between Victoria and his mate. Victoria laughed, the sound like ice breaking. How romantic. But also irrelevant. She pulled out a tablet and swiped through several screens before showing it to Blake. The Werewolf Council has voted. Unanimous decision. Scarlett couldn't see what was on the screen, but she felt Blake's emotions shift through their bond, from anger to something that felt like despair. You can't, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I can, and I have. Victoria's smile was all teeth and no warmth. Silverthorn Enterprises now controls 60% of the supernatural businesses on the East Coast. We have contracts with the Hunter Guilds, alliances with the Vampire Covens, and enough political leverage to destroy your precious protective network in a matter of days. She gestured toward the city lights spreading endlessly below them. Every business that provides sanctuary for your kind, every safe house, every pack that's allied with Steele, all of it can disappear with a phone call. Victoria's eyes found Scarlett's, and her smile turned predatory. Including your grandmother's medical care. Scarlett's power spiked, silver energy crackling around her fingers, but Victoria just laughed. Oh, the little weapon wants to fight. How delightful. Victoria turned back to Blake, her expression becoming businesslike. Here are your options. You will dissolve your mating bond with the abomination and marry me within the month, merging our companies and ending this embarrassing rebellion. In return, I'll allow your pet to live, in a facility where her power can be properly contained and studied. And if I refuse? Blake's voice was deadly quiet. Then I'll ensure Scarlett dies the same way she has in every other lifetime, screaming your name while you're helpless to save her. Victoria's smile widened. The council has been very accommodating. They're even allowing me to choose the method. I'm thinking a corporate raid gone wrong, perhaps some industrial espionage that turns violent. Or maybe a simple car accident, like what happened to her mother. The words hit Scarlett like physical blows, but it was Blake's anguish through their bond that nearly brought her to her knees. This was his worst nightmare, being forced to choose between his mate and her survival. You have 72 hours to decide, Victoria continued, checking her expensive watch. After that, the council's patience runs out, and so does your protection. She moved toward the elevator, pausing only to look back at Scarlett with eyes like Arctic winter. Enjoy your last few days as his mate, pet. Soon you'll learn what it means to belong to your betters. The elevator doors closed with a soft whisper, leaving Scarlett and Blake alone with the weight of an impossible choice. Through their bond, Scarlett felt her mate's soul breaking. He would have to give her up to save her life. And they both knew that this time, even his billions might not be enough to protect her. Chapter 6. The silence in Blake's penthouse stretched like a chasm after Victoria's departure. Scarlett stood frozen by the floor-to-ceiling windows, her reflection ghost-like against the city lights, while Blake paced behind her with the restless energy of a caged predator. Through their mate bond, Scarlett felt his emotional state, and it was chaos. Rage, desperation, calculation, and underneath it all, a love so fierce it threatened to consume them both. But there was something else, something he was actively trying to shield from her. A decision crystallizing in his mind that felt cold and sharp and absolutely final. We'll fight them, Scarlett said, turning to face him. Your pack, my power, we can take them all on. Blake stopped pacing, his storm gray eyes meeting hers with an expression she couldn't read. Can we? Victoria controls 60% of the supernatural business network. The Hunters, the Council, even some of the Vampire Covens, they're all in her pocket now. Then we'll find another way. There is no other way. His voice was flat, emotionless, and Scarlett felt something twist in her chest at the complete absence of warmth in his tone. "What are you saying?" Blake walked to his desk and picked up his phone, his movements precise and businesslike. "Victoria, it's Blake. Schedule the merger ceremony for tomorrow evening. I accept your terms." The words hit Scarlett like physical blows. Through their bond, she felt his anguish, but his face remained a mask of cold calculation that reminded her exactly why he was feared in boardrooms across the globe. "Blake, no." He held up a hand for silence, his attention focused entirely on the call. "Yes, I understand the implications. No, I don't need time to reconsider. 24 hours is sufficient to arrange the contracts." When he ended the call, Scarlett was staring at him like he'd grown a second head. "You can't be serious." "I'm always serious when it comes to business." He moved to the bar cart and poured himself 3 fingers of whiskey, his movements controlled and precise. Victoria was right. This rebellion was unsustainable. I let sentiment cloud my judgment. Sentiment? Scarlett's voice rose, power crackling around her fingers as her emotional control slipped. "Is that what you call our mate bond? Sentiment?" Blake's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but when he looked at her, his gray eyes were arctic. "I call it a mistake." The words sliced through her like a blade. Through their bond, Scarlett felt his emotional pain spike, but his expression remained coldly neutral. "I built this empire through calculated decisions, not emotional attachments," he continued, taking a sip of his whiskey with infuriating calm. "You were convenient. Available when I needed to work out certain impulses before my real marriage." "Real marriage?" Scarlett whispered, the world tilting around her. "To Victoria. An alliance that makes strategic sense." His voice was perfectly modulated, carrying the same tone he might use to discuss quarterly projections. "You were practice, Scarlett. A way to understand how the mate bond would function with my actual intended." Each word was precisely calculated to wound, delivered with the surgical precision of a man who knew exactly where to cut deepest. Scarlett felt like she was bleeding from wounds she couldn't see. "You're lying." But even as she said it, doubt crept in. The mate bond was still there, but Blake had locked down his emotions so completely that all she could sense was cold determination. "Am I?" He set down his glass and straightened his cufflinks with the casual arrogance of old money. "Tell me, Scarlett, what exactly did you think would happen here? That a man worth $50 billion would sacrifice his empire for a secretary drowning in debt?" The casual cruelty in his voice made her flinch. "I thought the mate bond is a biological function. Useful for reproduction and pack dynamics, but hardly the basis for important decisions." He moved toward his desk, effectively dismissing her. "You're not worth destroying my empire for." Scarlett stood there for a moment, power crackling around her as rage and heartbreak warred in her chest. Through their bond, she caught a flicker of something, pain so deep it felt like dying, but then Blake's shield slammed back into place. "Get out," he said without looking up from his computer. "I'll have Vincent pack your things and arrange transportation back to your apartment. Our association is terminated." Scarlett fled. She ran through the penthouse, into the elevator, through the lobby of Steel Tower like she was being chased by demons. Maybe she was. The mate bond pulled at her with every step, urging her to go back, to fight for what they had, but his words echoed in her head with devastating clarity. "You were practice. You're not worth destroying my empire for." She made it 3 blocks before the tears started. By the time she reached her old apartment building, she was sobbing so hard she could barely see. The shabby little space that had once represented safety now felt like a prison, cramped, dingy, and filled with the ghost of who she'd been before Blake Steele turned her world upside down. Scarlett collapsed on her second-hand couch and cried until she had nothing left. What she didn't see was the subtle black sedan that parked across the street, or the way Vincent spoke quietly into his earpiece from the driver's seat. "She's secured at the apartment, sir. No signs of pursuit." What she didn't know was that Blake stood at his penthouse windows, watching the city lights blur through tears he refused to shed as he systematically destroyed his own heart to save her life. Back in his office, Victoria Silverthorne was already making herself at home. She'd arrived an hour after Scarlett left, bringing a team of lawyers and accountants to begin the merger process with ruthless efficiency. "I must admit, I'm impressed," she said, settling into the chair across from his desk like she owned the place. "I expected more resistance to dissolving your pathetic attachment." Blake's fingers tightened fractionally around his pen, but his voice remained steady. "I'm a businessman first. Emotional entanglements are a luxury I can't afford." How wonderfully practical. Victoria's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "The ceremony tomorrow will be quite the spectacle. Half the supernatural world's elite will be in attendance to witness our union." "And Vincent Thorne?" Blake asked, his tone carefully neutral. "We'll handle the loose ends, as always." Victoria examined her manicured nails with casual interest. "The girl will need to be dealt with, of course. Even without your protection, she's still too dangerous to leave alive." Something flickered in Blake's gray eyes, there and gone so quickly Victoria missed it entirely. "Of course," he agreed. The attack came at dawn, just as Scarlett was finally drifting off to sleep on her couch. The scent hit her first, wild, predatory, and utterly foreign. Not Blake's pack. Something else entirely. She was on her feet before the door exploded inward, power crackling around her fingers as three massive figures filled her tiny living room. Werewolves, but unlike any she'd encountered before. These moved with a feral grace that spoke of centuries spent hunting, killing, surviving by claw and fang alone. The leader was easily 6'6", with silver-streaked hair and eyes like molten gold. When he smiled, Scarlett saw fangs that had been filed to razor points. "Scarlett Hayes," he said, his voice carrying the hint of an accent she couldn't place. "At last." "Vincent Thorne," she whispered, recognition hitting her like ice water. Through their bond, she felt Blake's emotional state spike from cold determination to absolute panic. "You know me. How delightful." Vincent moved with predatory slowness, his pack flanking him as they circled her like wolves surrounding prey. "I've been hunting your bloodline for 3 centuries, little wolf. Every lifetime, every reincarnation, always just out of reach." Scarlett's power flared, silver energy crackling between her fingers. "Not this time." "Oh, but it is this time." Vincent's smile widened. "Your precious alpha has abandoned you. Left you defenseless while he marries another." "How predictable." The words hit harder than any physical blow. Scarlett's concentration wavered for just a moment, but a moment was all Vincent needed. The collar snapped around her neck before she could react, cold metal that seemed to drink her power like a vampire drinking blood. Her legs went weak as her supernatural strength drained away, leaving her feeling hollow and utterly human. "Blood silver," Vincent explained conversationally as his pack secured her wrists with matching restraints. "Absorbs supernatural energy and redirects it. Very useful for containing troublesome prisoners." "Blake will come for me," Scarlett said, hating how her voice shook. "Will he?" Vincent tilted his head, studying her with the clinical interest of a scientist examining a specimen. "From what I understand, he's rather busy preparing for his wedding. Something about cutting losses and making profitable alliances." Through their mate bond, Scarlett felt Blake's emotional state, and for the first time since their confrontation, his shields dropped completely. The rage that poured through their connection was so pure, so absolute, that it took her breath away. He hadn't abandoned her. The cold cruelty, the dismissal, all of it had been an act. But realization came too late. Vincent's pack was already moving, carrying her from the apartment with supernatural speed. The last thing Scarlett saw was the black sedan across the street, Vincent waving mockingly at the surveillance team that had failed to protect her. The merger ceremony was being held in the Steel Tower's executive conference room, the same space where Scarlett had first witnessed Blake's pack in their true forms. Now it was filled with the supernatural elite, werewolf alphas, vampire lords, representatives from every major species that called the East Coast home. Victoria stood at Blake's side in a white dress that probably cost more than most people's houses, radiant with triumph as the officiant began the ancient ceremony that would bind their businesses and bloodlines together. "Do you, Blake Steele, Alpha of the Eastern Territory, agree to merge your holdings with those of Victoria Silverthorne for the good of our people?" "I do," Blake replied, his voice carrying across the silent room. That's when his phone buzzed. The message was brief, a photo of Scarlett unconscious in what looked like an industrial warehouse, Vincent Thorne's grinning face visible beside her. Every carefully constructed mask Blake had worn for the past 24 hours shattered like glass. The roar that tore from his throat was pure alpha rage, a sound that sent half the room to their knees and made the windows vibrate in their frames. His partial transformation was instantaneous, claws extending, fangs elongating, his gray eyes bleeding to molten gold as the predator he'd kept leashed finally broke free. "You stupid, arrogant bitch," he snarled, turning on Victoria with murder in his eyes. "You actually thought I'd choose you over her?" Victoria backed away, her face pale with sudden understanding. The merger was never going to happen. Blake's smile was all predator now, the polished businessman replaced by something that belonged in nightmares. "Did you really think I built a billion-dollar empire by being soft?" He gestured to the windows overlooking the city, and Victoria's face went white as she saw the Silverthorne Industries building across the street. Half the floors were dark, and moving vans surrounded the building like carrion birds. "Your allies?" Blake's laugh was devoid of humor. "Bought out, bankrupted, or convinced to switch sides over the past 72 hours. Your supernatural businesses? I own controlling interests in 80% of them as of this morning. Your precious council support? Amazing what vampires will agree to when you control their money supply." Victoria's eyes went wide with horror as the scope of his manipulation became clear. "That's impossible. You think I became the youngest billionaire in supernatural history by playing fair?" Blake's claws extended further, and several alphas in the room began backing toward the exits. "Everything I am, everything I own, exists to protect her. And you just declared war on everything I am." He turned to address the room, his voice carrying the absolute authority of an alpha who commanded not just through supernatural dominance but through pure, calculating power. "Vincent Thorne dies tonight. Anyone who stands with him dies with him. Anyone who brings me Scarlett Hayes alive gets to keep breathing." The room erupted into chaos as alliances shifted and the supernatural elite scrambled to choose sides. But Blake was already moving, his phone pressed to his ear as he coordinated the largest supernatural manhunt in centuries. "Everything," he snarled into the phone. "Burn everything Vincent owns to the ground. I want his entire operation in ashes by midnight." He'd spent 3 centuries preparing for this moment. Every business acquisition, every alliance, every billion invested, all of it designed to ensure that when someone tried to take his mate, he could destroy them so completely that their names would become cautionary tales. Vincent Thorne was about to learn why Blake Steele was the most feared alpha on the continent. And why some mates were worth burning the world to protect. Chapter 7. 3 months of hiding had taught Scarlett Hayes that money truly could buy anything, including invisibility. The safe house was a fortress disguised as a lakeside cabin, nestled deep in the Adirondack Mountains where satellite surveillance was limited and supernatural scents were masked by the wild forest around them. Solar panels hidden beneath artificial foliage powered a sophisticated security system, while the basement contained enough supplies to survive a siege. What it couldn't contain was the growing power of the children she carried. Scarlett pressed her hands against her rounded belly as another wave of supernatural energy pulsed through her. At 3 months pregnant, she looked 6 months along, the twins growing at an accelerated rate that defied human biology. But it wasn't just their size that amazed her. They were already responding to her emotions, their own developing abilities creating light shows beneath her skin when they were active. "Easy, little ones," she murmured, feeling them settle at the sound of her voice. "Mama knows it's cramped in there." "Ma'am?" Sarah, her head of security, appeared in the doorway. A former Army Ranger turned supernatural bodyguard, she'd appeared at Scarlett's apartment the day after her escape from Vincent, along with 6 other elite soldiers who claimed to be independently contracted for her protection. Scarlett had known better. The military precision, the unlimited budget, the way they all possessed an almost supernatural ability to anticipate threats, this was Blake's doing. Even after his brutal dismissal, even while playing the devoted fiancé to Victoria Silverthorne, he was protecting her. The mate bond had gone quiet after that first week, locked down so completely that Scarlett could barely sense his presence. But sometimes, in the moments between sleeping and waking, she caught flickers of his emotional state, rage so pure it burned, determination that felt like iron, and underneath it all, a love so fierce it took her breath away. "What is it?" Scarlett asked, noting the tension in Sarah's posture. "Intel came through on the Hayes research. You're going to want to see this." The documents Sarah spread across the dining table looked like something from a legal thriller: genealogical charts, financial records, and legal papers bearing seals that were centuries old. But it was the number at the bottom of the final page that made Scarlett's legs give out. $14 trillion, she whispered. "Conservative estimate," Sarah confirmed. "Your bloodline doesn't just go back centuries, it goes back to the founding families of supernatural society. Property holdings, mineral rights, investments that have been compounding for generations. You're not just the heir to supernatural power, ma'am. You're the heir to supernatural wealth that makes some countries look poor." Scarlett stared at the papers, pieces clicking together in her mind. "That's why Vincent has been hunting my bloodline. Not just for the power, but for everything," Sarah finished. "Control your bloodline, control approximately 60% of supernatural wealth worldwide. Add in your children." She gestured at Scarlett's belly. "Those twins aren't just the next generation of supernatural royalty. They're the keys to an empire." As if responding to the mention of their importance, the baby stirred. Power crackled beneath Scarlett's skin, and for a moment the cabin's lights flickered in response to their supernatural energy. "They're getting stronger," Scarlett murmured, wonder and fear warring in her voice. "Which is why we need to move," Sarah said, her expression grim. "Our perimeter sensors have been picking up supernatural signatures all morning. Someone's found us." The labor pain started an hour later. Scarlett gripped the bed frame as another contraction tore through her, power exploding outward in waves that shattered every piece of electronics in the room. The twins weren't waiting for a hospital delivery, they were coming now, whether she was ready or not. "Sarah," she gasped, feeling her water break in a rush of supernatural energy that made the entire cabin's foundation tremble. "On it." Sarah was already on her radio, coordinating with her team. "All units to defensive positions. Medical team, get up here now." Dr. Carmen Vasquez, a supernatural physician who specialized in abnormal births, appeared at Scarlett's side with the calm efficiency of someone who delivered werewolf cubs and vampire spawn across 3 decades. "How far apart are the contractions?" she asked, pulling on latex gloves while her assistant set up portable medical equipment. 2 minutes, Scarlett panted, then cried out as another wave hit her. This time, silver light actually burst from her skin, illuminating the room like a supernatural aurora. "They're manifesting already," Dr. Vasquez murmured, awe coloring her professional detachment. "In the womb. I've never seen anything like this." Outside, Scarlett could hear gunfire, automatic weapons and something that sounded like explosions. Her security team was under attack, which meant Vincent had finally found her. But then she felt it through the mate bond, a presence so powerful, so absolutely alpha, that every supernatural being within miles would feel compelled to submit or flee. Blake was here. The door to the cabin exploded inward, and Scarlett's heart stopped. But instead of Vincent Thorne, she saw a figure in tactical gear with storm gray eyes that blazed with supernatural fire. Blake moved through the cabin like death incarnate, his partial transformation making him more predator than man as he systematically eliminated threats with lethal precision. When he reached her bedroom, their eyes met across the chaos, and Scarlett saw her mate's carefully constructed mask shatter completely. "Scarlett," he breathed, and in that single word she heard 3 months of anguish, rage, and desperate love. Then another contraction hit, and Scarlett screamed as power exploded from her body. This time, the twins' supernatural energy was so intense that windows throughout the cabin began cracking. I need to get closer to her, Blake snarled at Dr. Vasquez, who was trying to monitor Scarlett's vitals despite the supernatural interference. You'll overwhelm her system, the doctor warned. The babies are already channeling massive amounts of energy. Adding your alpha presence could. Could what? Blake's voice dropped to that dangerous purr that made lesser beings freeze in terror. They're my children. She's my mate. I belong at her side. He moved to Scarlett's bedside, taking her hand in his despite Dr. Vasquez's protests. The moment their skin connected, the chaotic energy swirling around Scarlett stabilized. The lights stopped flickering, the windows stopped cracking, and her pain seemed to lessen as his presence grounded her supernatural abilities. Better? He asked, brushing damp hair away from her forehead with reverent gentleness. You came, Scarlett whispered, tears streaming down her face. I never left, he replied, his thumb stroking across her knuckles. Every day, every night, I've been hunting him while keeping you safe. The engagement was a lie. All of it. His gray eyes burned with intensity. Victoria's power base was built on debts and alliances I systematically destroyed. She has nothing left except the illusion of influence. But I needed her to think she'd won so Vincent would make his move. Another contraction hit, but this time Scarlett rode it out with Blake's strength supporting her. Through their fully open mate bond, she could feel his absolute dedication, his fierce protectiveness, and his overwhelming love for her and their unborn children. I can see the first head, Dr. Vasquez announced. Scarlett, you need to push with the next contraction. What followed was the most supernatural birth in recorded history. The first twin emerged in a burst of silver light so bright it temporarily blinded everyone in the room. A perfect baby girl with Scarlett's dark hair and eyes that already glowed with supernatural power. My daughter, Blake whispered, his voice breaking with emotion as Dr. Vasquez placed the baby in his arms. The moment he touched her, the infant's crying stopped, and she stared up at him with an intelligence that was definitely not human. The second twin followed minutes later, a boy who emerged crackling with energy that made every electronic device in the cabin surge to life simultaneously. Where his sister was light, he was raw power, his tiny fists already glowing with the same silver energy that had become Scarlett's signature. My children, Blake breathed, holding both infants with hands that trembled with reverence. My family. Scarlett had never seen him like this, the ruthless billionaire alpha reduced to wonder by two tiny beings who already wielded more power than most supernatural adults. That's when the real attack began. The cabin's reinforced walls exploded inward as Vincent Thorne led a full-pack assault. But instead of the surprise attack he'd planned, he found himself facing a defensive formation that looked like something from a military operation. Because it was. Did you really think, Blake called out, still cradling his newborn children while supernatural soldiers took positions around the cabin, that I would leave my mate and children unprotected? Through the shattered walls, Scarlett could see the forest was alive with movement. Not just Sarah's team, dozens of figures in tactical gear, moving with supernatural grace and armed with weapons that hummed with otherworldly energy. You think your hired guns can stop me? Vincent snarled, his partial transformation making him look more monster than man. I've been hunting your bloodline for centuries. And I've been preparing for this moment for months, Blake replied, his voice carrying absolute certainty. Every supernatural soldier for hire on 3 continents. Every weapon dealer who specializes in blood-silver ammunition. Every tactical advantage money can buy. He stood slowly, carefully transferring the twins to Scarlett's arms before his own transformation began. But this wasn't the controlled partial shift Scarlett had seen before. This was something primal and terrifying, an alpha unleashing the full extent of his supernatural nature. I am Blake Steele, he growled, his voice distorted by fangs and fury. I own half the supernatural world, command the loyalty of every major pack on the East Coast, and possess resources that dwarf small nations. My mate carries the blood of the founding families. My children will inherit power that could reshape the supernatural world. His claws extended to razor sharpness as his eyes blazed gold. And you thought you could take them from me? The battle that followed was less fight than massacre. Vincent's pack was skilled, but they were facing opponents who'd been handpicked from the deadliest supernatural soldiers in existence and equipped with weapons that could kill gods. But it was Blake himself who ended it. Moving with speed that made him blur between forms, he carved through Vincent's defenses like they were paper. When he finally stood over the ancient hunter's broken form, there was nothing human left in his expression. "This is for every lifetime," he snarled, his claws poised over Vincent's throat. "Every time you killed her. Every time you stole our future. You think this ends it?" Vincent gasped, blood frothing at his lips. "The council will never let you keep that power. Those children." "The council," Blake said with deadly calm, "answers to whoever controls the money. And as of tomorrow morning, I'll own controlling interests in 70% of their assets." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried absolute certainty. "No one will ever threaten my family again." When it was over, Scarlett sat in the ruined cabin holding their children while Blake coordinated cleanup with military efficiency. The twins had slept through the entire battle, their supernatural senses apparently recognizing that they were perfectly safe in their parents' arms. "It's really over?" Scarlett asked as Blake returned to her side. "It's over," he confirmed, gathering his family into his arms with infinite gentleness. "Vincent is dead. Victoria's power base is destroyed. And anyone else who might think to threaten what's mine just received a very clear message about the consequences." He looked down at their children, the daughter who would inherit supernatural royalty and the son who already commanded power beyond measure, and Scarlett saw the future crystallizing in his storm-gray eyes. "They'll never know fear," he vowed. "Never know want. Never know what it means to be hunted." Scarlett leaned into his strength, feeling the mate bonds sing with completion. They were together. Their children were safe. And the man who'd built an empire to protect her had just proven that some things were worth burning the world to defend. Their family was one of them. Chapter 8. The war that Vincent Thorne thought he was starting had been over before it began. As Scarlett held their newborn twins in the ruins of the mountain cabin, she watched through the shattered windows as Blake's true empire revealed itself. What she'd mistaken for a rescue operation was actually the largest supernatural military deployment in modern history, and every soldier, every weapon, every strategic advantage had been purchased, planned, and positioned months in advance. "Sir," Sarah spoke into her earpiece, her tone carrying the crisp efficiency of someone reporting to a superior she'd served for years. "Perimeter secured. All hostile forces neutralized. The package is safe." The package. Scarlett realized with a start that her security team had never been independent contractors. They were Blake's people, had always been Blake's people, watching over her with the devotion of pack members protecting their alpha's mate. Through the mate bond, she felt Blake's emotional state as he coordinated the aftermath, relief so profound it made her knees weak, rage that still burned like molten steel, and underneath it all, a possessive satisfaction that resonated in her bones. His family was safe. His enemies were dead. Everything he'd worked lifetimes to achieve was finally within his grasp. But Vincent Thorne had one final card to play. The explosion came from the north, a blast so massive it lit up the night sky and sent tremors through the mountain. Scarlett felt Blake's emotions spike through their bond, not fear, but cold fury that made her blood freeze. "Report," he barked into his radio. "Steel Tower, sir," came the crackling response. Multiple explosions across floors 40 through 60. Corporate records, financial servers, supernatural archives, all compromised. Scarlett's heart stopped. Steel Tower wasn't just Blake's headquarters, it was the nerve center of his entire operation. If Vincent had destroyed the servers, the financial networks, the carefully constructed web of alliances and obligations that held Blake's empire together. "It doesn't matter," Blake said, his voice carrying absolute certainty even as his building burned on the horizon. "Everything that matters is here." His gray eyes found hers across the room, and Scarlett saw the truth in their depths. The empire he'd built, the billions he'd accumulated, the corporate dynasty that spanned continents, all of it was just window dressing. What mattered was in this room, his mate, his children, his family. But Vincent wasn't finished. The assault came at dawn, and it was unlike anything Scarlett had ever witnessed. Not a pack of hunters or a corporate raid, this was a supernatural army funded by offshore accounts and equipped with military-grade weapons that hummed with otherworldly energy. "He's liquidated everything," Blake observed with clinical detachment as he watched the approaching force through tactical binoculars. "Every asset, every favor, every alliance he's built over 3 centuries. All of it converted into this final attack. Can we hold them?" Scarlett asked, automatically adjusting her grip on their sleeping twins. The babies seemed oblivious to the approaching danger, their supernatural senses apparently recognizing that they were surrounded by their father's protection. Blake's smile was pure predator. "We're not holding them, little wolf. We're ending this." What followed wasn't a battle, it was a demonstration. Steel Tower might have been damaged, but it was only one node in a network that spanned the globe. As Vincent's forces approached the mountain stronghold, Blake's true resources came online with devastating efficiency. Satellite surveillance tracked every enemy position. Drone strikes eliminated key targets with surgical precision. And when Vincent's supernatural soldiers finally reached the cabin's perimeter, they found themselves facing an enemy that had spent decades preparing for exactly this moment. "You see," Blake explained conversationally as he coordinated the defense from the cabin's command center, "Vincent made the same mistake everyone makes when they try to understand me. They think the money is the point." He gestured to the tactical displays showing his forces systematically dismantling Vincent's army. "The corporations, the buildings, the bank accounts, those are just tools. The point has always been power. Real power. The kind that lets you remake the world to protect what you love." Scarlett watched in awe as her mate revealed the true scope of his preparation. Every employee of Steel Industries who'd seemed too graceful, too alert, too perfect, supernatural soldiers in business suits. Every corporate acquisition that had appeared financial, strategic positioning of assets and allies. Every billion spent on overhead investment in a private army that made some national militaries look amateur. "How long have you been planning this?" she whispered. "Since the first time I lost you," Blake replied, his voice soft with old pain. "London, 1847. You were 17, working as a governess for a merchant family. When the hunters came, I was across the city on business. By the time I arrived..." He didn't finish, but Scarlett felt his anguish through their bond. 2 centuries of guilt, rage, and determination distilled into this moment. "I swore that night that it would never happen again. Every lifetime since then, I've been building toward this. The resources, the network, the absolute power necessary to ensure that when they came for you again, they would face everything I am." That's when Vincent himself finally appeared. The ancient hunter burst through the cabin's reinforced walls like they were paper, his full transformation making him look more demon than wolf. But he wasn't alone. 3 other figures flanked him, vampires whose pale skin and red eyes marked them as old blood, the kind that had survived centuries by being stronger and more ruthless than anything else in the darkness. "Corporate alliances," Blake observed with clinical interest. "Desperate times. You cannot have them," Vincent snarled, his claws extending as his gaze fixed on the twins in Scarlett's arms. "The bloodline ends with me. The power belongs to those strong enough to take it." "The power," Blake said, beginning his own transformation, "belongs to those strong enough to protect it." The battle that followed was less fight than systematic destruction. Vincent had allied with vampires, but Blake had spent lifetimes learning to kill every supernatural species that walked the earth. His movements were fluid, precise, economical, no wasted motion, no unnecessary risks. He fought like what he was, an alpha who commanded not through raw strength alone, but through superior strategy, preparation, and absolute ruthlessness. But Vincent had one advantage that Blake hadn't anticipated: desperation makes predators do stupid, dangerous things. When it became clear that his vampire allies were being systematically eliminated and his own forces were in full retreat, Vincent did the unthinkable. Instead of targeting Blake directly, he went for Scarlett and the children. Scarlett saw him coming and made a choice that probably saved her babies' lives but nearly cost her own. She threw herself between Vincent's claws and the twins, taking a blow that was meant to kill supernatural royalty across her chest and abdomen. The sound Blake made when he saw his mate bleeding wasn't human. It wasn't even animal. It was something primal and terrible, the roar of a force of nature that had been pushed beyond every limit. What he did to Vincent defied description. Blake didn't just fight the ancient hunter, he destroyed him. Systematically, methodically, with the same cold precision he brought to corporate takeovers. He broke Vincent's bones one by one, tore away his supernatural advantages piece by piece, and dismantled his very existence with clinical efficiency. "You killed her 6 times across the centuries," Blake snarled as he pinned Vincent to the blood-soaked floor. 6 times I held her dying body while you escaped into the darkness." Vincent tried to speak, but Blake's claws had shredded his throat. This time, Blake continued, his voice dropping to that dangerous whisper that made lesser beings freeze in terror, "She has me. And I am everything you never saw coming." The end, when it came, was swift and final. Vincent Thorne, the hunter who had stalked Scarlett's bloodline for 3 centuries, died as he had lived, consumed by his own hunger for power that had never understood love. But even with Vincent dead, Scarlett was dying. Blake dropped to his knees beside his mate, his hands hovering over wounds that were too deep, too severe. The twins lay beside her, their infant faces turned toward their mother with an awareness that was definitely not human. They could sense what was happening, and their tiny hands glowed with power they were too young to control. "Scarlett," Blake whispered, gathering her into his arms as blood soaked through her clothing. "Stay with me. You have to stay with me." Through their bond, he could feel her life force ebbing like a tide going out to sea. The wounds Vincent had inflicted weren't just physical, they were supernatural, designed to drain power, to kill beings who were too strong to die by normal means. "The children," Scarlett breathed, her voice barely audible. "Protect them. They need their mother," Blake replied fiercely. "I need their mother." That's when he made the choice that defined everything he truly was. Power, supernatural ability, alpha dominance, the very force that made him what he was, could be transferred. At a cost. The kind of cost that most beings weren't willing to pay. Blake placed his hands over Scarlett's wounds and began to pour his very essence into her. Not just his strength, not just his healing ability, but his supernatural nature itself. Every advantage that made him alpha, every power that had helped him build his empire, every drop of otherworldly ability he possessed, all of it flowed into his dying mate. The process was agony beyond description. Scarlett felt it through their bond, the sensation of having his very soul torn away and rebuilt inside her, the way his supernatural abilities drained from him like water from a broken cup. But it was working. Her wounds were closing, her strength returning, her power stabilizing as his own life force filled the empty spaces where Vincent's attack had stolen her essence. "Blake, stop," she gasped, understanding what he was doing. "You'll die." "Doesn't matter," he breathed, his skin going pale as his supernatural nature drained away. "Nothing matters except keeping you alive." For a moment that lasted eternity, Blake Steele was nothing more than human. Mortal. Vulnerable. Everything that had made him a force of nature was gone, given freely to save the woman who was his world. That should have been the end. By every law of supernatural biology, an alpha couldn't survive the complete loss of his nature. But Blake had never been just an alpha. The mate bond that connected them was stronger than supernatural law. Love, it turned out, was more powerful than biology. As Scarlett's strength returned and her power stabilized, something flowed back through their connection, not his old abilities, but something new. Something that belonged to both of them. When Blake opened his eyes, they were no longer the storm-gray Scarlett had fallen in love with. They were silver now, like moonlight on water, marked by the power they shared. "My magnificent, impossible alpha," Scarlett whispered, cupping his face as their children stirred between them. "What are we now?" "Everything," Blake replied, gathering his family into his arms. "We're everything." 10 years later. The steel building rose into the Manhattan sky like a spear of glass and steel, its top floors disappearing into low-hanging clouds. But unlike the tower that had burned a decade ago, this one was built to different specifications entirely. Scarlett stood in the penthouse office, watching her children play in the space that had once been a sterile corporate environment. Now it was something unprecedented, a supernatural sanctuary that served as the seat of power for an empire that spanned both the corporate and otherworldly realms. Isabella, 10 years old and already manifesting abilities that made ancient vampires nervous, was teaching her twin brother Alexander to manipulate light into complex patterns. The boy, more cautious than his sister but possessing raw power that could level buildings, practiced with the careful concentration of someone who'd been taught early that gifts came with responsibilities. The Tokyo acquisition is complete, Blake reported, ending his call with the satisfaction of a man who just added another trillion-dollar corporation to his portfolio. That makes us the controlling interest in supernatural business across 3 continents. He moved to stand behind Scarlett, his arms encircling her waist as they watched their children together. At 39, he was even more devastating than he'd been at 29. The silver that had appeared in his hair after their bonding only making him look more distinguished, his power now something that commanded respect from beings who remembered when gods walked the earth. Any regrets? Scarlett asked, leaning back against his chest. About how we got here? Blake's laugh was warm, content in a way that the cold billionaire alpha she'd first met could never have achieved. About building a supernatural empire? About raising children who will reshape the world? About having a mate who could destroy armies but chooses to stand beside me instead? He turned her in his arms, his silver eyes blazing with the same intensity that had captured her soul a decade ago. The only regret I have, he said, cupping her face with hands that still trembled slightly when he touched her, is that it took me 7 lifetimes to get it right. Scarlett rose on her toes to kiss him, tasting love and devotion and the promise of forever on his lips. Around them, their empire hummed with supernatural energy and corporate power. Their children played in safety that had been bought with blood and billions. And somewhere in the city below, the supernatural world continued to evolve under the protection of a family that had redefined what it meant to be truly powerful. Blake Steele had gotten everything he'd ever wanted, his mate alive and safe, his children strong enough to inherit the world he'd built for them, and love that had survived across lifetimes to bloom eternal in this one. He was, finally and forever, exactly where he belonged. Home. The end. Thank you for listening to this story. Subscribe, like and share for more.